So, what do you think was intriguing about Jefferson?
That's what I don't know really. Why a little boy would suddenly get interested and I don't know why Jefferson was why it became a favorite of his. Because you read about a lot of famous people. And,
Jefferson was a botanist.
I think because Jefferson I think maybe because Jefferson talked a lot about his gardens, and Rudy always loved gardens from the time he was little, and his mother did too. And he had a little garden from the time you could ever remember. And I think the fact that his mother loved antiques and old things and furnished the house that way, and his dad was a cabinet maker and worked at Old Mystic Village to help restore the buildings down there. I think so. There was a lot of interest in history and what was going on, and I think Rudy's dad got his mom to learn English by showing her interesting articles in the newspaper that were of an historic nature, because it's more interesting than reading a lot of dumb stuff that she didn't really care to hear about. And I think if you grow up in those kinds of situations, you naturally tend to. And they always had a vegetable garden too.
Yeah.
So vegetables and fruits, and Rudy was very into all of that from the time he was very little.
And we know he worked on the Williams farm where they did things the old-fashioned way.
That's right. And then as soon as he was big enough to ride a bicycle, he would ride his bike up to the Williamses, and they took him in he had no grandparents in this country because his parents were immigrants to this country. And so his grandparents were all far away in Italy, and the old folks in the Williams homestead kind of adopted Rudy because he adored them. They were they were the only elderlies that he really knew well, and they loved him because he loved everything they were doing, which was old and old-fashioned. They gardened in using old methods, and they grew lots of herbs, and Rudy learned an awful lot about how things used to be, and they liked to tell too how it used to be, as old folks do. And I just think that it was kind of natural for him to be interested in Jefferson, because Jefferson also loved plants and talked about in his writings about his roundabout and etc.
What plants grew well next to each other, and
yes, and Rudy was majored in, as soon as he could go off to college. He was an agricultural major, and then when he went to graduate school, he majored in horticulture. So if you begin to read a lot and you're interested in the history of horticulture, you soon come across Thomas Jefferson. And I think all of those things put together made him, was very excited to.
So how did he know what Jefferson had planted at Monticello?
Well, this was something he really had to figure out. He knew from Thomas Jefferson's writings and letters back and forth, which he was given access to, and those things were revealing to Rudy, because he talked. He mentioned when he would write, even a friendly letter that had nothing to do particularly with his gardens or horticulture, he would always mention, because that was foremost in his mind.
And I think one of his daughters was very interested in
Yes,
botany and plant
that's
science, and he wrote long letters
to her and talked about what exactly
Detailed letters.
in about what he was growing, and I think that those detailed letters were really helpful to finding out. He had an idea that the grove must be, just looking at the landscape, have been, but the letters I think were really very helpful too. Yeah. And there was no, I think he knew much more than anybody else who applied for that job. Rudy got it in a minute. I mean, he was hired instantly after his interview, so he was a happy clam.
I bet he was. And how did he find out where the grove was and what trees were there?
Well, we did some borers. That's,
That's how you came to be there too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I went down to as a botanist and horticulturist and ecologist to see if I could help him in any way. One thing they needed to do was be able to date some of the trees so that they didn't remove trees that were there as part of Jefferson's garden, or pretty hard to tell exactly whether this tree, which was so old, Jefferson just left there on purpose, or whether he planted a plant that incorporated sort of, which I think he did a lot of. And but we also found a lot of recently planted things that needed to go bye-bye, that were not part of Jefferson's, could not have been a part of Jefferson's original plan.
And was Jefferson also collecting trees?
Yes, he did, and that's why there was a lot of letter back and not just trees, plants of all kinds. And so there was a lot of backy-forthy about how to get them. Bring something over. Do you bring a plant over? Do you bring seeds? I never read any of the letters, and so I can't be very smart about that.
Also, I think that Jefferson asked Lewis and Clark to bring back seeds and seedlings.
I think that's true too. Yeah, I think you can read a lot about what transpired and what Jefferson was thinking. Way back.
Did they make use of aerial photography to figure out where
sometimes
walls
they had to
were
do that
and
too.
the groves and that kind of thing?
Yeah, they did do
roads?
that. Yeah, I remember they did do that. Yeah, and they could see where there had been post holes, and then Rudy could put together what Jefferson had been writing about sometimes by when that particular thing was planted or was there already, if he wrote about it. Yeah, he looked at all of that, and then of course, knowing the plants and the history of when certain plants came, he knew, well, he couldn't possibly have had that plant because it wasn't imported into this country until a much later period, so it would not have been something Jefferson would have planted or known about.
And I know he was in correspondence with people like Bartram and other plant collectors.
Oh, yes, he was.
He kind of, Monticello in a way was kind of like an arboretum, a place where people could come and share about plants and learn about
Well, that's true, yeah.
plants.
I guess that's true. And because he was a scientist too. Jefferson was very interested in the history of plants and what made them work and why they grew here in one place and wouldn't grow in another place, and he knew a lot. He was a good horticulturist, and he planted his vegetable garden in a sensible place where we get lots of sun, and you know, he did a good planning job. And it was kind of fun. I mean, Rudy had a wonderful time figuring out where he would have, trying to think in the same way that Jefferson did, really, to restore again what he had originally planned, and to be sure that it was Jefferson and not Rudy.
Yes.
Thinking maybe because he really wanted it to be Jefferson.
And that's a very important thing about Rudy's work, is that what he was after was authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And not his own ego. Like a lot of architects or landscape architects want to do something that's their signature.
Is on.
And in this case, it's quite the opposite. He was trying to detect Jefferson's signature on the landscape.
Definitely wanted it to be Jefferson.
Yeah.
Start to finish. Yeah.
Were there any major changes that had to take place on the landscape there at Monticello as a result
there were,
of
but I can't.
his work?
I can't speak to that because
I think I remember something about moving a whole road and
I don't
cart
remember
pathway.
that. I don't remember that, but I know it was important to restore the roundabout, and I know that was not gonna be an easy job, and the grove, of course, was important too.
To restore.
Yeah, those are things I happen to remember very well, and
So you mentioned borers.
Yeah.
And how that is related to aging a tree, but some of the people listening to this conversation might not know how that works. So,
well, I'm referring to an instrument, not a scientific instrument, not an animal that bores.
exactly. It's like a hollow drill, right?
It's a hollow drill that takes you drill into the tree. It doesn't harm the tree, but it removes a little core from the tree so that you can count the years of growth on the tree, and so that gives you an idea when this tree must have been planted, or about anyway, as near as you can come.
So you could tell which trees Jefferson might have planted or which ones might have predated
him.
Jefferson as
and
well.
Some that he
by how old they were.
By how old they were, yeah. And of course how you can recognize certain species were not grown there.
It must have been really fun for you and he to be there together at Monticello.
It's I mean, everybody was gone. When everybody was gone home, that's when it was especially fun, because you could sort of think of yourself as being Thomas Jefferson and Mrs. Jefferson in that beautiful setting in the house. Of course, we stayed in a guest room off of the outside of the house, the Jefferson's home, but we could still sit on the steps at night on Monticello and watch the sun go down. That was wonderful. Just think. I used to say to Rudy, did you ever imagine that you might one day, when you read about Monticello and Thomas Jefferson and all, that someday you might actually sit on his doorstep and watch the sun go down? I just thought that was the most wonderful thing. That, for me, that was the most wonderful end of the day. It just sort of made it so perfect. Yeah, that was a very exciting thing. Yeah.